Okay, so this is the second session, recorded session on Walid Raad. I hope you got the first one. I remind you that if you have any questions, you can send me your questions first by mail. And if it doesn't work because you're not getting something, you can ask me. We can have a Skype or a WhatsApp call to clarify things. So let's continue with Walid Raad. Because we have to continue, it seems that it's highly probable that these recordings will continue because the university apparently will be closed also next week, but it's not yet sure. But so we need to get used to this format. So let's continue with Raad. Last time we covered the notion of hysteric symptom, which was really the main concept around which the early work of Walid Raad, i.e. the Atlas group, gravitated. Now, if you remember, the notion of hysteric symptom, abstract object, and the like, consists in saying that when you have an event, the way you experience it, the way you record it, and the way you experience it are not the same. Meaning, when you have a traumatic event, you live that trauma, but for you, it gets distorted, and for you, it is represented in a different way. Now, the resulting representation of the trauma is itself informed by the workings of memories, fantasies, defense mechanisms, and all of these things. So, for example, you have a traumatic experience. For you, you remember what happened differently, and for you, what happened differently is actually informed by all kinds of distortions. As I've told you last time, if you take the canonical cases from Freud and psychoanalysis, the child remembers something. He remembers that he has a kind of, let's say, phobia towards, let's say, cockroaches, or he has heavy breathing symptoms, or this kind of events. And actually, these are distortions of something that happened with him. So the phobia towards animals or cockroaches or physical symptoms are actually the distorted version of something that happened with the child. And this thing is usually a traumatic event. So you see here there's a gap. There's a gap between what you call the sign and the referent, between what we think is the case and what was the case. The referent is the object, what happened, and then the way we picture that, the way for us we understand that, is not the same. So you have this kind of gap between the referent and the way we end up producing a document, as Walid Raad calls them, of the referent. Now, this is, we have seen that also in the concept of abstract object. In the abstract object, if you take Lebanese wars or the kidnappings of the Westerners in Lebanon, these are abstract objects. They are abstract objects, and in order to determine them into objects, you need the interplay of ideology, of politics, etc., that are going to produce documents in order to determine these abstract objects into objects. If you remember what you have seen with the Western hostage crisis, the American administration is going to produce reports, TV news intervention or interviews You will have the speech of Reagan, etc., etc., and all of these are going to determine the Western hostage crisis as a crisis of the American administration and nothing else. So I insist on these two structures, the hysteric symptom structure and the abstract object structure, because as you can see, it's the same pattern. You always have something, which is either the trauma or the abstract objects. Then you have a gap, and then you have the determination of this abstract object that fills the gap in order to support a strategy for survival. Because after all, the disguise of the trauma is itself a strategy of survival, meaning the child or whoever is traumatized usually disguises his trauma because it's unbearable for him. And this is how he's able to cope with that or to live with that. Even though here you will have symptoms, you'll have things which will be symptomatic, things which will break through this disguise and this will for survival. And you have it's the same patterns that you have in the abstract object sequence. You see, the will of survival of the American administration is going to disguise or reconfigure or determine the Western hostage crisis as simply a problem of the relation between the different administrative bodies in the American administration. But then you have symptoms. You have things which are a bit weird that appear in these reports, such as there's practically not a single word on the intervention of the US in the region, which is quite symptomatic. Actually, it's very symptomatic to deal with the hostages crisis while never mentioning why they are kidnapped, what are the reasons behind that, and the like. So these become, here you see, kind of symptoms which are embedded or included in these documents which are supposed to promote a way of survival. So if you want, really this is the what we call or what is known as the postmodern trope. The postmodern trope because in general postmodernity, be it with Freud, Nietzsche, later on Foucault or Deleuze or Derrida or all these names which are known for being the defendants or those who develop this notion of postmodernity. In postmodernity you always have this kind of gap between the sign and the referent, between meaning and the object of the meaning. And Nietzsche mostly began that by showing that actually the way we make sense of the world, the way we picture the world, the way we explain the world is actually not a transparent operation where the explanation is going to stick to the explained object, but rather the explanation is always contaminated by the will to survive of the one doing the explanation. So you don't have anymore, if you want in the postmodernist trope, if you want a kind of simplification, you don't really have this kind of transparent relation between the signifier and the signified, object and meaning, all of these things. What you have is a kind of non-transparent, contaminated relation between these two poles. Now, of course, Walid Raad really inhabits and he mobilizes this conceptuality, as we have seen in the Atlas group, by referring to Edward Said, Marx, Freud, Saussure and semiotics, and Barthes, and all of these really gravitate into this kind of basic schema of the difficult determination between object and between meaning and reference, signifier, signified, and the like. So I hope this is clear. Now, the thing is that there are going to be a break. Walid Raad, as I've already told you, you have two major projects, the Atlas Group and scratching on things I could disavow. And here you have a break. The break occurred in 2004 as reported by Walid Raad himself. Now, and here Walid Raad really thinks that, reflecting on that break, he says that, around 2004, many things happened, like the Israeli war in Lebanon is 2006, the Hariri assassination is 2005, the Gulf War is in 2003. So you had a lot of major events in Lebanon and in the region. It remains that Walid Raad thinks that it's his reading of the books of Jalal Toufic that really made him shift his conceptuality. So I'll read you the quote. As usual, all the quotes are in the notes that you will find in the box as usual. And here Walid Raad says the following. He says, "But I think that the most important reason for my ending the Atlas Group in 2004 was my continued reading of Jalal Toufic's books and the affinity of his concepts with certain problems I wanted to address, certain experiences and feelings I had, and certain forms I find myself making in the studio at that time." Right? So this is really like the break. And this is when Walid Raad, he's going to move from notions such as document, witness, ideology, testimony, memory, that practically deal with the experience of those who live in civil wars and the like, and move towards a new set of concepts which are related or named as the imaginal, intuition, undeath, and the like, which are the withdrawal of tradition, which are all concepts that come from Jalal Toufic's work. So this is the break that happens, and we need to understand really what is this break about. Now, the one of the major concepts that Walid Raad is going to take from Jalal Toufic is the concept of the withdrawal of tradition past a surpassing disaster. Now, this concept states that whenever there is not a disaster but a surpassing disaster. Now, what's the difference between a disaster and a surpassing disaster? As Jalal Toufic explains in his book, Jalal Toufic says that actually a disaster, it's simply when war just destroys, buildings, kills people, and is very violent in only the physical sense. On the other hand, you have a surpassing disaster when this physical violence, which could be less, by the way, than so they're not related. It's not that a surpassing disaster you have to have more dead people. It's a violence that is not measured only here quantitatively, like how many dead toll, how many destroyed buildings, but it's a disaster that's going to affect meaning as such. It's going to affect the immaterial dimension of things. And what Jalal Toufic says is that in some wars, not all the wars or all the events, it could be a war, a tsunami, I don't know, it could be an atomic bomb, or it could be simply an event. And these events are surpassing disasters because they affect the immaterial dimension of artistic, intellectual, or other kinds of works. So, as Jalal says, in other words, whether a disaster is a surpassing one cannot be ascertained by the number of casualties, the intensity of psychic traumas, and the extent of material damage, but by whether we encounter in its aftermath symptoms of withdrawal of tradition. So you see, what we need to see here is, as I told you last time, or in previous sessions when we were doing the decolonizing Walid Raad session, what you need to see is that you have to feel it in almost your everyday life. Sometimes you feel that after an event, what you used to do and think before the event is not relevant anymore, or you can't just continue doing it in the way you used to do it. And I gave you the example of Kulthum and the defeat of Nasser in 76, which I think is a kind of withdrawal of tradition, because that epoch was what gravitated around Egyptian cinema back then, and Kulthum and the like. You feel that has withdrawn. You can listen today to Kulthum, but it's not in the same living tradition atmosphere that your parents, let's say, used to listen to Kulthum, where it was something that was really like vehicled and supported by this rise of the Arabism and Egypt and the war with Israel and the like. So this here, if you want, it's a kind of example of that. Or if you take the Lebanese war, the what we refer today as the golden era with its music, its kind of encode joy of life, and with the Acapulco beaches, restaurants, tourism in Lebanon, all these images that you still see more or less when you go to the 60s and 70s of Lebanon. You feel that the war came like a break, and you just can't go back to that. So the idea is that the content, the meaning is withdrawn. It's as if now you look at something, a book or a movie, or you listen to a song, and it can go even in colors and lines and architectural styles. You look at these things and you just don't get. You really have no access to their living meaning. All what you see is a kind of opaque surface. You just see these things which starts to look, as you'll see, they start to look as formal attributes. Formal attributes because you look at it and it doesn't mean anything to you anymore. It doesn't connect to your living tradition. And all what you do is that you hear sounds when it's a song, or you see architectural lines or colors if you're a painter. You don't really have access to what it meant and what it means. So in this situation, meaning in the situation where the tradition has withdrawn, you have the following attitudes. You have 5 attitudes when it comes to the withdrawal of tradition. The first attitude is that you simply overlook. What does it mean to overlook? You don't see these things anymore. You see like the music, architecture, philosophical works, artistic works, they are simply overlooked, meaning you look at them as if they are nothing. You look at them as if they don't mean anything. This is what we call overlooking, which is, if you want, the most brutal state, the most harsh state when you relate to the tradition. For you, this tradition is simply gone. You see the buildings, and for you, they mean anything. And as we will see later with Toufic, this actually prepares the destruction of the buildings. We'll see that more in detail with Toufic, but just for you to understand this overlooking, we can argue even if it's not as such in Toufic, you can argue that if you take Solidaire, it's an overlooking. All these buildings for them didn't mean anything anymore, and this prepares even more violence. Now, the other position is that you continue to repeat the content of what is withdrawn. So let's suppose you are a music teacher, you keep on teaching, be it, let's say, Kulthum or the democratic theories of the 60s as if nothing happened, or you keep on promoting the modernity of the 60s if you are an architect, as if the Lebanese war didn't happen. You see, this is not really resuming. This is like, you don't see that the works, be it architecture or art or philosophy or other, you don't see that the living content has withdrawn. It's as if nothing happened, and for you the war didn't affect the immaterial dimension of the intellectual works. And this actually is very, very also dangerous, as well as Jalal Toufic puts it, because this is where you start propagating counterfeit. So, of course, if you build today a building like Shire's building in the 60s, which is a kind of a big name in modernist Lebanese architecture, you would doing a kind of copy of that, which is a counterfeit, because you don't have anymore the spirit of it, you don't have anymore the content of it, and you're just copying formal relations, formal aspects today. And of course, this doesn't work like that. This is why Jalal Toufic says that if you want to re-access the tradition, you need to resurrect the tradition. So it's not that you just copy what you see. You need to literally be able to bring back to life that which has withdrawn. I give you the examples that Toufic gives. There was the Nosferatu of Murnau. I don't know if you watched it. If you didn't watch it, because we will cover it anyway with Jalal Toufic in the lectures on Jalal Toufic. So you had the Nosferatu of Murnau, which was before the Second World War, and Murnau is a German. And of course, the Nazis and the Second World War is a surpassing disaster for Jalal Toufic. And in order to re-access this cinema, this expressionist cinema of Murnau, later, I think around the 70s, Herzog made a remake of the Nosferatu of Murnau, and by doing a remake, he was able, Herzog, to resurrect that work. So it wasn't like a formal repetition, it was really a remake that is able to bring back to life and to re-inject these works in life. So the third attitude then, which is very demanding, is to be able to resurrect the tradition, or to bring back that lost meaning into this life by making it, by making it really like powerful enough to innervate the lives in which we live. It has to be able to talk to our lived experience today, and this would be the resurrection. Now, the fourth attitude is to record the withdrawal. If you can't resurrect works, and Jalal Toufic thinks that it's a very difficult task to resurrect the tradition, and most people fail. And for him, he calls modern those who fail. For him, modernists are simply people who really try very hard to resurrect the tradition, but they fail. And those who succeed become part of the tradition, not modernists. But anyway, when it comes to the fourth position, I said that if you can't resurrect, you can at least be sensitive enough to record, to see that actually something has withdrawn. And this is when art, says Jalal Toufic, will act as a mirror for the vampire. I read you the quote. With regard to the surpassing disaster, art acts like the mirror in vampire films. It reveals the withdrawal of what we think is still there. So one of the ways is to really show you that something is not there anymore. Something is not here anymore, and this is when art will act as this mirror. Now, the last position is the one where you are going to document and put aside these formal aspects in order for future generations to be able to resurrect them. So Jalal Toufic puts it this way: the documentation is for the future, not only in the sense that it preserves the present referent for future generation, but also in that it can function as a preservation of the referent only in the future, only when the work of resurrection has countered the withdrawal. Which means, you see here, what Toufic is underlying is that it's not that today you are preserving the content or the reference, the real thing. Today, all what you're doing is preserving the external shell, really the thing that remains when the tradition has withdrawn. You preserve that because you don't understand what this is, but you have a hunch, you have a kind of intuition that you have to preserve that. And this intuition actually comes to you from your collaborators in the future, meaning people from the future will give you a hint that you have to take this and that in photo, or you have to paint this or that. And this is how you document for the future, and it's only in the future that your future collaborators are going to be able to resurrect and give a referent for these things. Because for the time being, the referent has withdrawn. So you see, when you take this concept of the withdrawal of tradition, you have the following problem. The problem is that when a generation or a civilization or a people live through a surpassing disaster, if you just keep on transmitting the tradition, you have the danger of transmitting a counterfeit, meaning a double or it's like a kind of not the genuine content, and this is dangerous because this is how you lose the tradition, and now it is masked under this counterfeited tradition. The other danger is that if you don't transmit and you just overlook all of what was produced before the surpassing disaster, this is an added disaster because you lose the tradition. And in that case, you can see that the wars, because in this region we practically are dealing with war kinds of surpassing disasters, the wars wouldn't have only killed and destroyed buildings, but they would have also made your tradition unavailable anymore forever. So it's like a tradition side, like genocide, but in here you kill the tradition, you make it unavailable, and actually it's another tradition that usually comes and gets itself in place, or you live in this kind of oblivion of having a tradition. So I hope now you get this problem, and you see that it's not far from the struggle that Raad was already having with imperialism and colonialism. If we assign, I think as Raad does in his thesis, it's very clear, and in many of his writings, if you really assign the different wars that are occurring in the region for imperialist and colonialist interventions, I'm not saying that Raad only thinks this is the cause, but this is one of the major causes. And you can see that these wars, which are triggered by the interplay of imperialism, colonialism, and their allies, be it the families, the mafias, militias, or Israel in the region, all of this complex web of actors provoking the wars, are actually also provoking something else, which is the withdrawal of tradition. And I think that here Raad is really like holding to a kind of the same kind of critique and struggle, because for him there is even something more dangerous, at least via the reading of Toufic, which is the destruction, in quote, of tradition itself, or of its absolute withdrawal. So, with this in mind, now we can start the kind of walk through the works of Walid Raad, and I hope you will open the website, which is the second website, also I think a fairly new website, very rich and updated, by Walid Raad, and it's called scratchingonthings.org. So you can open this website. And on this website, you will see, we will go through a number of these works. So the first work I would like you to open is section 139, the Atlas group. It's the first one. Now, if you open this work, you see that the work consists of a shrinked model of the Atlas group. And here the story goes like that. The story goes that actually Sphere Semler, which is the gallery with which Walid Raad works, what's interesting is that in the Atlas group is that the Atlas group was almost, as far as I know, as such, never presented in Lebanon. The lecture performance, artworks, etc., they used to be most of the time presented outside of Lebanon. And hence, Sphere Semler asked Walid Raad for many years to present these works in Lebanon. And he refused many times until in 2008 he accepted. But Walid Raad says he shipped all his works to Lebanon in order to put on the exhibition. And when he arrived to Sphere Semler, he discovered with a great surprise that actually all the works had shrinked to 1 to the hundredths. So they all shrinked, and for him this was a fact, meaning they really shrinked, and it wasn't something psychotic or something that happened in his head or a joke that Sphere Semler was playing on him or stuff like that. No, for him, when he went to the gallery, the works had shrinked, and actually when he called the installers, those who installed the exhibition, to check if he's seeing them small or if they are really small, they all confirmed that indeed the works are really small, and he was very surprised, and actually this gave... So they've put them on a model and not anymore as they were supposed to be in the gallery itself. And here Walid Raad puts it like that. How do I determine whether the shrinking of my works in section 139, the Atlas group, is an aesthetical fact? What confirms to me whether I am dealing with a metaphor, an allegory, a hallucination, a conventional use of the shrinking trope, or an aesthetical fact. Given that my palette of associations is mostly tuned to the visual field and primarily to the visual arts, as opposed to music, physics, or biology, I tend to trust to an extent whether I am the producer and or the receiver of certain colors, lines, volumes, and forms, and as such to distinguish between a creative act, a psychotic episode, the mediating effects of a technique or material, the conventional use of a trope, and so on. You see, what is Walid saying here? He's saying that he's an artist, and actually he's very sensitive to art things, meaning he's very sensitive when it comes to knowing if what he's thinking as an artist is a genuine creative act, a psychotic thing, just a play with technique, a kind of technical trick, or if something really is going on, meaning an aesthetical fact. And indeed, Walid Raad thinks that the shrinking of the Atlas group is an aesthetical fact, meaning it's a work that cannot anymore be seen the way he used to see it, and it cannot be anymore experienced the way he used to experience it. You see, this is why it's a literal thing. It's not that it's a metaphor that they shrank. It's simply that now, in the realm of the image, in the realm of the imaginal, meaning in the realm of this dimension where you experience images as such. We will cover this realm more in detail with Jalal Toufic hopefully soon. But you can get it. There's a realm where you deal with images, where you are really like living in this dimension where you compare images, relate to images. You see a Hitchcock movie and you compare it to a painting, etc., etc. And here you are living in that dimension. So I think if you want to understand what Raad is saying here is that as an image, the image shrank literally, meaning you cannot anymore look at it as you used to look at it before 2008. So how can we understand this shrinking? Now, we can understand this shrinking in two ways. The first one, I think, is not the proper one. Consists in saying that in 2008, after, let's say, the Israeli invasion or the Israeli bombardments of Beirut and the south in 2006, maybe this is a surpassing disaster, and hence the works have shrinked in order to, or at least for the psyche, for the understanding of Walid Raad, they shrank because the reference they used to have has withdrawn. But I don't think that this is really a good reading in this case, because what I really think happened is that, as he mentions, the real event for him was reading Jalal Toufic. And hence, they shrank not because of some war or bombardments. I think that they shrank because, for Walid Raad, the conceptuality in which he produced the Atlas group is now simply not valid anymore. Which means that thinking, or the ways in which he used to think the Atlas group, which consists in what you have mentioned earlier, the relation between abstract object, document, determination, or trauma, document, and hysteric symptoms, this kind of conceptuality to produce these works is not anymore valid. And actually, this conceptuality, which we have called earlier the postmodern trope, the difference between signifier and signified, and how life and survival is going to shape the relation between the signifier and the signified, this postmodern trope is itself part of the withdrawal of tradition. At least this is how I read it. Walid Raad, before he read Jalal Toufic, he used to think like we all think, with, in quote, imported concepts and an imported culture. And part of this imported concept and imported culture are the concepts which are coming from postmodernity, with all their validity, critical power, etc. It remains that Walid Raad felt that these concepts are not applicable anymore for him, when he noticed that actually he was using these concepts because he is part of a withdrawn tradition. And I think when he realized that, this is when he saw that his Atlas Group project is shrunk, is small. It lost its dimensions. It lost its, in a way, its full-blown reality. Now, I think this thesis that I'm presenting to you, that actually the works of Walid Raad shrank because he realized that when he did them, he only could have done them from the perspective or while being in the atmosphere of a withdrawn tradition. I think it's confirmed in an interview between Suhat Rabulsi and Alain Gilbert, where Suhat Rabulsi, which is one of the alter egos of Walid Raad, and actually the alter ego of Walid Raad that is going to become the major figure in the project Scratching on Think I Could Disavow. So, we've covered it in Decolonizing Raad earlier. In that project, a Sweet Talk, or a photographic document of Beirut, of which you can find the photos in the box. In the box you have these photos in the image folder. In the images folder, the folder 10, Decolonizing Raad, You have Raad Sweet Talk, where you see the images of Suhat Rabulsi. So what I'm trying to tell you is that Suhat Rabulsi, in that interview, as you have already seen, tells to Alain Gilbert, she tells him that actually when she read the Toufic books, she understood that all the difficulties that she had in the determination of the referent, the abstract object and how you determine it, and all of these things on, like in missing Lebanese wars, or the impossibility to take a picture in some neighborhoods of Beirut, all of these things, all of these difficulties that she used to have while taking pictures in Lebanon, and how difficult it was to take pictures in Lebanon, wasn't due to the fact that there's always a gap between the signifier and the signified, but it was due to the fact that the referent itself has withdrawn. So when you're looking at something, you're simply not getting what it is or what it means. And I think this is really like the break which is enacted here. So the Atlas group, if you want, was still in the postmodern trope, what I will call, in quote, an imported form of culture, while actually the new paradigm, which is the paradigm of the withdrawal of tradition, is a paradigm where you have to see that what you are taking in your photos or what you are trying to paint or talk about is simply not here. I think really this is, if you want, the difference. It's not that there's something here and you determine it differently depending on who you are. We, meaning those who live through wars and through surpassing disasters, they relate to their environment as an abstract, as a formal surface. What does it mean we relate to this as a formal surface? It means that what you are dealing with looks like a set of formal attributes. Why do they look like formal attributes? Because, as I've told you, when the tradition withdraws, the meaning, the way thing really operates, function, and signify is not here anymore, and all what you're dealing with is this kind of external envelope, this kind of exoteric presence of the thing, and you don't have access anymore to the lived immaterial meaning of these things. So this is why Walid Raad puts it like that when it comes to the formal attribute. Walid Raad says, I emphasize the last line, with the concomitant risk that facets relating to the subject matter might be mistaken for purely formal ones. There would be a mistake to think that now we are dealing with pure formalisms, like monochromes, only colors, art for art kind of posture. Raad continues, in other words, Jalal is describing a situation in which images are no longer referential. In the absence of their referent, images are likely to be viewed in purely formal terms. Again, a generative situation. I wonder whether this relates to the emptiness, loneliness, and sleepiness you've been speaking about. So here, what is he saying? He's saying that actually when people go to his exhibitions, they feel, at least the interviewer here was feeling that, the work that he exhibits in scratching on things I could disavow, they seem to be sleeping. And indeed, this kind of sleeping state of the work of art, or of the work of art of Walid Raad, is due to the fact that he only takes pictures, or he takes elements of what looks to be highly formal, like only colors, like patterns of wallpaper patterns, things that looks really formal. And actually Walid Raad animates that with the stories that are supposed to be behind them. But it remains that when you look at them, they look like these like formal aspects. And the formality itself comes from the fact that they don't relate to a referent anymore. And what Walid Raad is doing is that he's preserving these things for future generations to find the referent of these things. So I hope now you get this kind of thing that Walid Raad is doing. What he's saying is that when you do an artwork, you do it unconsciously, more or less, because you don't understand today what you're doing, given that you are in a region which is hit by many surpassing disasters. And you have to do that by following your intuition. Your intuition is given to you by people in the future that are sending you signals, more or less telepathically, for you to do something. Even if you don't know what you're doing, you are gonna do it. And when you do it, this thing that you did as a formal surface would be then filled later on when the future generation will be able to connect again and resurrect the tradition. This is when these things will reacquire their meaning. So I hope you get this kind of convoluted thing, but this is, I think, how he puts his, or how he presents his work. So one of these works that really deal with this conceptuality is Index 26 Red. So if you open Index 26 towards the bottom of the list, I hope here you will read the story, which is a very nice story, as Walid Raad usually is. It's a very nice, humoristic, beautiful story about the work. And the work consists of what? The work consists of a series of names, and Walid Raad says that he used to receive these names while he's daydreaming, and for him these names were related to Arab artists. And he silk printed on the wall all these names. Now then, after printing them, you had, I think it's a cook, a guy, a cook, a chef, which actually was also an expert in Arab art. And this cook made Walid Raad notice that he misspelled the name of one of the artists. And one of the artists' name is Jean Tahan, while actually Walid Raad wrote Jean Taffan. And if I remember well, the cook came with a red spray and he sprayed on the nice work of Walid Raad heavily, and you can see it on the website. So this is how he puts it in the stories in the walkthrough. Sometimes he sprayed it, but it doesn't matter. What matters is that now you had this name sprayed with red. And the thing is that Walid Raad understood later on that actually the future generation didn't really care about how to spell Jean Tahan, but rather they really cared about getting the color red, because this is what is unavailable in the future. So all what they wanted to do is get a document that will be preserved with the red on it, this specific shade of red. Okay, so I hope now you understand how the story goes. So you always have this kind of peripheral thing going on. You think that the real problem is the name of Jean Tahan. Well, actually, the future generation only are looking for preserving the color red before it becomes absolutely unavailable, meaning destroyed or overlooked. And this is what they need later on in the resurrection of the tradition. Now, I hope you understand that this kind of center-periphery thing which is going on here, meaning you think that the work is about that, but actually the work is about this kind of difference between what it is about and, the deviation on from what it is about, I think that this really exemplify the problem that we don't know what is going on. If you want, this is a kind of narrative or a kind of performative version of, if you want to express that I'm not knowing what I'm doing, well, I think one of the best solutions is to put it in the this kind of difference between your aim, your conscious aim, which is to write the names properly, and something that happens accidentally, as if on the periphery of what you are supposed to do exactly, which is someone comes and he sprays on your names, and this is actually the whole work was about to get to that accident. Okay, so I hope now you get this first work, which is Index 26, which is part of the strategy to preserve colors, shades, whatever, sometimes names or lines for the future. In this case, it was the preservation of a color. Now, in Appendix 18, which is not on the website, but you have some samples in the you have some samples of Appendix 18 in the box, in the folder 13, which is on the formal attribute. So if you open the images, folder 13, you see the Appendix 18. There's practically a kind of nice graphic work with a lot of vivid colors, letters. Somewhere you have, not in this picture, but sometimes you have logos and scribblings and all kinds of graphic documents. Now, what Walid Raad says about Appendix 18 is that colors and lines, they feel when a disaster or a surpassing disaster is coming, and given that colors and lines know that a surpassing disaster will make them unavailable, they go and hide. Now, we would expect them to hide in artworks, but actually they hide next to the artwork. And this is again this kind of game between center and periphery, meaning you expect it to hide in the artwork because artworks are preserved in good conditions. You put them in sometimes in a fridge, in a museum, and people really try to preserve these artworks. Actually, what Walid Raad is saying is no. What really happens is that you hide on the side of the artwork. So I will read you the quote from Appendix 18. So Appendix 18, Walid Raad says the following. He says, I expected such colors, lines, shapes, and forms to hide in paintings, sculptures, films, photographs, and drawings. I thought that artworks would be their most hospitable hosts. I was wrong. Instead, they took refuge in Roman and Arabic letters and numbers, in circles, rectangles, and squares, in yellow, blue, and green. They planted themselves inside the frames that circulated not front and center, but on the periphery of Lebanon's cultural landscape. So again, this kind of periphery where actually I think it puts in play the fact of a kind of unconscious thing that we are doing. We are like putting aside these colors and lines, and actually, but we don't know really where we're putting it because the real place is on the side and not in the center of the works. Now, to exemplify this a bit more, it's something that I read on, I think, on the old website of Scratching on Things I Could Disavow. Unfortunately, the old one, is not available anymore. It's not accessible anymore. And on this old website, Walid Raad says at one point that why are we building museums in Saadiyat? Saadiyat is this island, the island of happiness in Abu Dhabi, where they're building all these incredible museums. You'll have a Guggenheim, you have a museum by all these architects, Zaha Hadid, Tadao Ando, etc. And Walid Raad is wondering, if you take, for example, Louvre Abu Dhabi is one of them, or one of these incredible structures, saying, why are we building these things? And Walid Raad says in the website that actually what really counts in these museums are neither the artworks nor the cultural promotion, but actually the fact that people will come and look at the artwork, and while they're looking at the artwork, they will have postures, gestures, and all of these things will be documented in photos, and this is actually what needs to be preserved. So it's neither the artwork nor the museum, It's the people who go there and, like gesticulate next to the artwork, because this is actually the people which are supposed to be the people from this region, meaning people whose tradition has withdrawn, meaning people whom we don't understand anymore, their gesture, postures, ways of speaking, and the like. And actually, this is what needs to be documented and preserved for the future generation to resurrect. So I hope now you're getting this kind of diversion strategy. So it's really a strategy of diversion. I put a work of art here or a center, and actually what is really important is what is going to happen on the sides, meaning on the periphery. Now, to really show you this, Walid Raad, at one point, while doing this project on the history of Arab art, which is scratching on Sing I Could Disava, while doing this project, he got interested with the work of Walid Sadeh, which is Love is Blind. Now, I hope you remember the work by Walid Sadeh, which is Love is Blind. If you remember, it's a work where Walid has put captions of the paintings of Mustafa Farrukh, and these painting descriptions were supposed to refer to the painting above them, but above them you only had a white wall. And just above the caption of the painting, Walid Sadeh usually wrote sentences which are a bit poetic, or they have a kind of poetic tone in them. And these sentences, the important part is not they are poetic, is that they have a content. The meaning of the sentences is referential, meaning the index referring to the city or the stuff like that. So the meaning of the sentences are either, if you remember the analysis we did of that work, either referring to something or speaking about the disjunction between words and things. So whatever is the case, you see, this is really like the gesture or the work of Walid Sadeh, which I think repeats the reorientation of the gaze, which is proper to excessive materiality. So if you forgot that, just to refresh your memories, you know that the main point of Walid Sadeh is that you are always going too fast and above the traces of war, the missing, the cadavers, all of these things that you have seen. We always look at things and go too hastily towards the past or the future. And what we really need to do is really anchor our gaze in these things and dwell and linger with them. I hope you remember that. You remember that what Walid Sadeh is really trying to do is to show us that we have to become attentive to the present and really try to be able to inhabit and live in the present that is practically filled with traces of violence, cadavers, missing people, and the like. And it's only this kind of attention to the present that will make us capable of building something else. Now, I think that his artwork, which is Love is Blind, really reenacts this looking at the present. Because what you see with the caption is that the caption invites you to look, and when you look, all what you see is what is there. And as Walid Sadeh puts it, you see a wall, and you see that actually there's nothing to see, but actually this is exactly what we need to see. Okay, I hope this is not too convoluted. It's very simple. You see that actually in Lebanon, what you really need to realize and see is that our sight is not a sight that can go towards the future and paint a landscape out of the land, as he puts it. Meaning we cannot do like Mustafa Farrukh and just look at what this place can be. All what we can do is realize that we are living in a place with no future, and we have to live with it in proximity and really look at it in this way of seeing, which is seeing by way of near blindness, as he puts it. So I hope you understand how the work by Walid Sadeh works. It was by making you attentive to the wall, because actually this is what you have to be attentive to in your everyday life. Now, Walid Raad asked Walid Sadr to borrow this work. He told him, can I borrow this work? Can you do it in my exhibition? You'll put the caption and everything. And Walid Sadr refused. He refused. And here, this is what Walid Raad replied or commented on in one of his exhibitions. And you have also here you have the description on the site here, which is, if you click on Walid Sadr's Love is Blind, you will see the description and the reactions and and how he replied. So Walid Raad says, Walid Sadr must have sensed that what fascinated me was not his installation, and even less Farrukh's paintings. He must have sensed that what drew me to his work were the shadows that shaped his walls and captions. And that in this regard, I don't need his permission, because these shadows move independently of his love is blind, and are prone to manifesting themselves here and there in forms other than shadows. Okay, so you see, it's like, so what he's saying is practically what really interested me in Walid Sadr's work is the shadows on the wall. I think it's an interesting, like actually Walid Sadr oriented the gaze of Walid Raad on the wall, and here what Walid Raad became attentive to are the shadows. And again, I think this is one of the diversion strategies of Walid Raad. What Walid Raad is saying is that what we really need to capture, at least this is my reading in this kind of dialogue between the two, what we really need to capture is the living formal things which are floating on the surface in places of withdrawn traditions, like reflections, shadows, gestures, colors, lines, words sometimes, all of these things which are now emptied from any kind of content or depth. And we need to really gather all of these things in order to for future generations to resurrect. So I hope now you get this kind of how these two works work together. If for Walid Sadr really what's important is to become attentive to the present, I think there's an additional layer, which is, yes, we become attentive to the present, but we need to see that in this present, the tradition has withdrawn and things are emptied. Really, things have lost all depths, and they are without a reference, they are formal attributes, and we need to gather all of that for future generation. Okay, so I hope this first series on really the conceptuality of the formal attribute is clear. So if you want in Walid Raad's new project scratching on things that could disavow, you have, like, I think three main bubbles, sorry. You have the formal attributes that you have just seen, meaning all of these surfaces, envelopes that needs to be preserved as manifestations that you have to document for the future. You have the second bubble, which deals with living dead artworks. Living dead artworks, which is actually the website that you have in front of you, deals extensively with that. And the third bubble is about museums. So you have really like these three big chapters: preserving or documenting formal attributes for the future, thinking artworks as living dead artworks, meaning like an undead artwork because the tradition has withdrawn. And last, the building of the museums and what are these museums for. So if you move now to the living dead artworks, now what Walid Raad says is that, as you know, they are building a double of the Louvre in Abu Dhabi, which is Louvre Abu Dhabi, which is already very symptomatic and interesting in relation to what we have spoken about colonialism and the doubling and the impossibility of naming and all of these things. But here, Walid Raad is taking it differently. He's saying actually that the double of the Louvre in Abu Dhabi is going, or is itself, the manifestation of the withdrawal of tradition of the Arabic Islamic culture. And what will happen is that when the Louvre Paris is going to send works of art to the Louvre Abu Dhabi, things are going to start happening on the way, meaning on the way towards Abu Dhabi. These artworks are going to start behaving in a very weird way because they are living dead artworks. So I'll tell you what Raad says. The notion of the dead before dying artworks emerges at this point as the analog as to why the paintings are attracted to their crates, as to why they love their wooden boxes. And it is at this point that we arrive at the appropriate antidote for such artworks, the painted mirror image on the smelly crates' facades. Okay. So actually, here what he's talking about the artworks that you can see in postscript to Arabic translation, the postscript to the Arabic translation, where you see that what Raad did is that he painted on the boxes of the artworks. And actually, he did it again with another one, which is yet more letters to the reader. So if you open yet more letters to the reader, you see that now it's Suhat Rabulsi who painted on the crates of some art, the crates meaning the boxes containing paintings of art. So why is he painting on the boxes? Now he's painting on the boxes because the story goes, if you, in the walkthrough, meaning while he was performing and presenting the work, he said that actually in Abu Dhabi, one of the section of the museum, one of the collections was bought by a sheikh, or at least it was sponsored by a sheikh, and the curator thought it appropriate to buy a whole collection related to some works concerned with the First World War. Anyway, the story is that when she bought these works, and in the collection you had all kinds of things, among them carpets and stuff like that, the sheikh wasn't happy, and he asked the curator to send back these works to Germany, from where she bought them. So she sent them back to Germany, and she was surprised that the artworks came back to Abu Dhabi. And each time she used to send them away, they used to come back. And this is when she thought that the best way to let these artworks stay in Germany is to paint on the boxes of the artworks the artwork images. This way, when the artworks are coming to Abu Dhabi, are coming back to Abu Dhabi, they're going to be scared to death by their mirror image, and they're going to fly back to Germany. Okay, so I hope you got the story. Now, what is the story about, and where does it come from? As you know, vampires and living dead people, they always go back to their tombs. And for Walid Raad, the artworks in a situation of a withdrawn tradition are living dead artworks, meaning they are just the skin of the artwork and not the content of the artwork. And this is why they're going to be attracted to their tombs, meaning their crates. And as you know, in vampire movies, if the vampire sees his image, this is why actually he cannot see his image, but if you can show him his image, he's very afraid and he breaks the mirror. So living dead people are afraid of their own image, and this is how you get there. This is how you get to paint on the crates. Now, what I think is, besides that, because Walid Raad insists that his works, are not only illustrations of his stories, but I think they stand on their own, and I think he's right. There's at least this is what I appreciate as well. I think there's something strong in what he does. Even plastically, I think these images of paintings on the boxes, they are really in dialogue, and they give you the feeling of funerary art. As you know, in Egyptian art and mummification, they used to paint the face of the dead man on the sarcophagus, meaning they used to paint the face of the dead man on the sarcophagus for the dead man to be recognized later in the realm of the undead. So I think that these practices are part of that imaginary and that tradition, and what is being enacted here is this kind of gesture where you're going to paint the things on the crates. If you want, another one is, which I think is very interesting, is another letter to the reader. So if you take another letter to the reader, I think you see this kind of haunting art. There's something of the undead, of the haunting, of the vampire-like as a work of art. And I think this whole dimension of the undead is what is being explored with the withdrawal of tradition, meaning things become undead or half alive when you disconnect them from their other counterpart, which is the tradition or the living traditions that make them live. And in this work, another letter to the reader, you see these artworks as if they went out of the boxes. And you see what Walid Raad did is that he cut, or he laser cut, the silhouette of these artworks, and you feel that they have this kind of shadowy presence. Now, you can explore more. You have the whole list in the notes. But just to conclude, one of the other aspects of when you are a living dead artwork is that you become this pure surface. And as a pure surface, you have two consequences, or at least this is how I read it. First, you lose your shadow. You don't have a shadow anymore. And actually, many characters from vampire movies don't have shadows, or they have... some characters don't have shadows and others have very elongated shadows. But in any case, I think all this reflection is about the loss of physicality, the loss of, like the real thing as it is. And what happens is that you can lose your shadows or you can substitute skins. So in preface to the third edition, you see works of art who change skins and which don't have shadows. So in the installation work by Walid Raad of the preface to the third edition, you see works of art that actually don't cast shadows. And what Walid Raad says in the walkthrough is that you need to paint the shadow, like physically, in order for this shadow to attract other shadows. Here you go into this kind of really like a kind of causality between or on representation. So I explained that to conclude. You see, what I think is really like meaningful or crucial in these stories, because these stories, they sound like, psychotic stories or funny stories, but I think there's something else at play. Now, the something else at play is that when you don't anymore have the structure of referring to, meaning of this refers to that, I have a word and it refers to its meaning. If I just have a word that starts to be just like a sound, and not anymore a word that connects to a meaning, what happens is that all of these shells, all of these exoteric surfaces, skins that Walid is playing with or putting in images, they start to have relations between them. For example, a skin of one object goes and moves into the other object because it's not bound anymore to any object, because objectivity as such is lost. So what you have is that all of these formal attributes, they start to have a life on their own, like the living dead have a life on their own. And what you have now is a kind of causal interaction between all of these formal attributes, skins, colors, letters, etc. And what Walid Raad puts in image and in narrative is this kind of game of interaction between the different attributes. So you have a kind of causality now between these things. For example, a letter can go and hide next to a painting, and if you paint a shadow, it can attract the optical shadow. And while if you transport works of art someplace, they can come back, and for you not to let them come back, you paint their image on their boxes. This way they are afraid of their images and they fly away. And you see, what I really think is interesting here is that you start living in a kind of plane which is the plane of the imaginal, the imaginal plane, which is a plane discovered or at least explored by Ibn Arabi, and Jalal Toufic is going to talk a lot about it, where you see that actually it's as if you have a domain where all images have a life and live on their own, and this kind of withdrawal of tradition is giving access to this domain of the pure domain of the images, where images really interact causally together instead of referring to something else. You see, usually an image refers to something. You take an image of a cup, it's about a cup. But when you are in a withdrawn tradition, when you take an image of a cup, let's say an Islamic vase or an Islamic cup, this image doesn't refer anymore to its referent, but it stands on its own. It's a pure surface, it's a pure image, and as such it can now interact with another pure image, and all of these interactions between images, they create this causal web of the images, which is the life of the imaginal world. Now, I hope you can compare this to the web of information that we have seen earlier with other works more related to the Atlas Group logics, where each item connects to another, and this is how you explore your paranoia, delirium when it comes to abstract objects. You see, in that case, the referent was still there. The referent was still there, and we were still dealing with, in quotes, the real world. Meaning, if you take the performance on the Arab Muslim men that get literally kidnapped by the CIA or others just because they are suspected to be terrorists, here you see that he's really playing on how you look at something, which is the Arab man, and because you're paranoid, you think he's a terrorist, and hence you determine the referent, which is the Arab man, with your paranoia, and you take action on that ground. Now, in here, it's a different plane. It's not the plane of psychosis or of paranoia or of delirium that you have seen in the information web artworks. It's more the plane of the images as images, or the imaginal as such. And I think that this is really what interests Walid Raad. So to conclude, Walid Raad says that what is really interesting, and this is the third section when it comes to the museums, what is really interesting is not to know if the sheikh and the sheikhas are cynical or not, because many people think that in Abu Dhabi they're building museums to either make money laundering, or because this is how they will be able to buy weapons, like the cynical version of why they are building museums. And other people think that actually they are building museums because they are really enlightened and nice people, and they're doing a renaissance of the Arab art. Now, what Walid Raad says in his conclusion is that he's not interested in neither theses. He doesn't think that it's neither about this nor that. It's neither about knowing if the sheikh and sheikhas are cynical or nice people, but actually what we need to see is that we live in a situation of a withdrawn tradition, and we need to be able to deserve that. We need to be able to be deserving of the situation in which we are, and the museum being built are part of the situation. And in order to really assess that, meaning to deserve it, what we really need to see is that the world is flat. This is why at one point, while presenting the work on the museums in Saadiyat, Walid Raad concludes like that. He says, I don't care if it's cynical or not cynical, but I'm sure of one thing. It remains that between 2017 and 2024, an incident will happen. A man on one of these museums opening will claim that the world is flat. The very next day, I open the newspaper, turn to page 6, and look at the bottom right-hand corner. I read the following headline: Demented man disturbs opening, claims that the world is flat. So I think the flatnesses that really need to be addressed is the realm of the images as cut from their referent, being pure images now, formal attributes, and interacting together. And I think that this is what needs to be deserved, and also this is a way of living and a way of thinking that allows the creation of all kinds of narratives, images, discourses, and a way to think the image which is, or at least which is not the postmodern or modern way of thinking these images. And I really think that this is a chance, meaning there's something really fertile and productive in affirming the withdrawal of tradition and starting to see all of these surfaces moving around as you can see it in the work of Walid Raad. So I'm sorry I was a bit longer, so I took 6 more minutes. So I hope you will go through the notes. I can't just read all the website. I think it's not very useful, but you can go through all the notes. Now you have the basic concepts, and you can look at the different works on scratching on things I could disavow. Now, I will send you an email today because you are going to have to do your quiz at home. I'm going to send you 5 questions or 4 questions, I will see. And you will have to answer these from home on a Word document. You have to answer the 4 questions. Because you are doing them at home, you will have simply to go through the 4 questions, and they are going to be only on Walid Raad. And this will count as your quiz number 2. And if you are still off, we will see what to do with. If you're still off for the test, you already know what you have to do, but I will remind you during the sessions.